The velocity pack consists of 7 devices. I'm gonna go through all the devices so you get a picture of what's in there. So let's take one example. I got a tambourine sound here, which is nested in a drum rack. And let's say you want this to be on a constant preset velocity. You can just drag and drop the preset, simple preset velocity in front of it and define the velocity via this number field here. Very quiet. And now, no matter how hard or how soft you hit, it will be always played in a velocity of 100. So this becomes handy if you want to set this at some parts dynamically and at some parts you want a constant velocity. So you could, for example, automate the simple preset device, velocity device, to be turned on in some parts and to be turned off in some parts. Another cool device is the Simle Threshold device. So this means it's a gate, so only velocity over a certain threshold will be passed through. So if you got some very sensitive drum pads, or if you need the drum pads to be sensitive in some part of your set and in other parts of your set you don't want them to be that sensitive, you can set up a threshold, let's say around 100. And now if I'm hitting with a low velocity, so the hit is detected, but it won't get passed through. Only when I'm hitting with a velocity of 100 or above, the velocity will pass through. Especially for drum sounds, you sometimes want to adjust the velocity curve or the velocity you are playing, especially on stuff like multi-layered sampled sounds like this kit here, Kit Deep Snare Dynamics, which is a really nice acoustic sampled kit with a lot of zones. You can see we have a lot of zones here, so it's a really nice acoustic sampled kit. So you might not feel, it might not feel right when you're playing your pad, your eDrum pad, or with a different MIDI controller. So let's have a look how this MIDI which is being produced looks like here. We have a monitor show here, so we can see when we are hitting our pad what kind of MIDI values are coming in and what kind of MIDI values are going out. So we could now press Alt and change the curve here, for example, making it a bit higher, making the incoming velocity values a bit higher than they actually are coming in. And now it feels much better to play this acoustic snare here. We have a few presets here as well, so we could set some compressed values here. We could go really deep and add more points if we need to, and just set those as we like, as they feel right. So just switch those off again. Yeah, it could go a bit higher, a bit earlier. Maybe at another point here, like this. Just switch on the add point section here and then adjust the curves and the values to your needs. And this way you can just adjust very in-depth and very in detail, and you can see if you switch on the monitor again, and make your pad make your pad feel much more natural and much better sounding regarding to the samples you're triggering. Let's say I have 2 drum samples here, and I want those to be triggered by one pad depending on how hard I hit. So I can use the velocity to pitch layer device for that. And let's set this to 2 because I only want to produce 2 different sounds. So I have to set the velocity values for each layer for them to be triggered. So if I set the first one, which will be a C1, so this tambourine, which is sitting on a C1 slot here, to be triggered all the time. So every time when I'm hitting now, this note is being produced. And if I want the second sample, the C-sharp 1, the snare 1 is sitting on the C-sharp 1 slot here, be triggered if let's say triggering or hitting with a velocity from 75 up to 127. So every velocity note or every note with a velocity under 75 is now triggering only the first layer, and every note with a velocity over 75 up to 127 will trigger the second layer as well. So I have to set an input note here, which I can do by pressing S and then hitting the pad. So now I'm receiving a C1. If I'm hitting not so hard, velocity under 75, I only get the tambourine. And if I'm hitting harder, I'm getting the snare sound as well. So you can use the velocity to pitch layers in a more experimental way here as well. So if you want to play some tonal sounds, and if you want different pitches to be triggered, you can do this with the velocity to pitch layers really nice as well. So let's say we want to have 4 layers here. Let's distribute the velo range. And now if I'm setting up my pad here, the velocity will play a different pitch of one instrument. I took a grand piano here. And you can see, you can change the pitches now here. So let's apply a scale. Let's say we want to play C3 and a major scale here. I can switch on apply, and now I get C, D, E, F. So I can now set up different pitches here if I need to, or I can set the velocity value as well to a preset velocity, because now only if I'm hitting really loud, I'm getting a higher pitch. And this means the notes are going to be quite quiet if I'm hitting very low here. And let's set this to the same velocity value here. So now I'm getting a velocity. Each note is being played in a velocity of 100. So now have those layers separated. I can set up those layers as well to play simultaneously as well. So let's set up a chord maybe here. Let's set up a C major chord from C3 and maybe put in a nice 7th note here, B3. So I can play even chords if I'm playing with a higher velocity. And if I want all those to be louder, I can set this up here with a preset velocity as well. Another really nice experimental use would be to use the velocity to pitch, but to scale it to a certain range. So if you use the velocity to pitch scale, you first need to sync your input node. Whoa, nice. And if you are now playing with a different velocity, you will determine the pitch between this set ranges here. And the velocity, maybe the range is a bit too broad, so let's set this up to maybe C1 up to C2. So now the velocity or the pitches which are being generated are in this range here. And you can hear here as well, depending on the instrument you're using, obviously a higher velocity is producing a louder note. And if you don't want this, you can preset your velocity here. Let's put it to 100, for example. And no matter how hard you hit, you get the same velocity. Cool. So you get monitoring here as well. Maybe let's set the range a bit higher to demonstrate this better. Oops. And there is a link button here as well, which is not shown at the moment, but yes, so this is a really nice experimental way on how to use this device. Okay, so for the last two devices of the pack, I'm using my Note to Chords here to be able to show you what's possible here as well. So I just have those note triggering chords from my SPD-SX now, and most drum controllers are sending a quick note off after you hit. So if I'm just playing, nothing is happening, you can see a MIDI note is coming in, but it's much too short for triggering chords or triggering tonal sounds here in some cases. So I'm using a note length just to show you what's possible now. So let's say I want to play and control the length of those notes via my playing velocity. So I can use the velocity to note length scale here. So what I'm doing now is I'm setting up a time or note values. Note values always are relative to the main BPM of Ableton Live. So let's set it up via time. So let's say shorter notes and longer notes up to 1000 milliseconds, so 1 second. So if I'm playing now, and if I'm playing louder or harder, the chords are getting played longer. I'm gonna set this up to around 2 seconds here, so I can demonstrate this a bit better. So I can see here again my incoming velocity and the duration which is being produced. And as well, I could use a preset velocity after the device here if I want this to be at the same velocity here. So let's put this up to around 80, for example. So even if I'm now playing louder or with a higher velocity, the velocity will be set to the output velocity of 80. Okay, the last device would be the velocity to note length layers. So I could actually set up layers here as well if I want to. So for example, I could set a lower velocity to trigger a longer time. Here again, I could set note values as well. So now it would work the other way around. Hitting louder would be shorter notes, and hitting quieter would be longer notes. And you get a nice monitor feedback here as well. The layer which is being triggered will light up yellow. So you can see here which layer you are actually triggering.